Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Hockey East. Along with Bridget Prue, I'm Eric Galanti. It's time to lock in on the playoffs. The quarterfinals are here on the women's side. We have 4 games to preview coming up on this Saturday. We'll have 3 of them across our Nesson family of networks. We can't wait to bring them to you. Let's start at Schneider Arena, because I think this is the most fascinating game of the group. You have this Providence team that you and I were sitting here doing this show. We were not really talking about yet at the start of the second semester, but they have rolled ever since that point, and they take on a Northeastern team that it feels like forever since Northeastern has not had a home game in the Hockey East playoffs. So a really interesting 4-5 game that'll be a 7 o'clock start on Saturday right here on Nesson.
Yeah, Providence had some ground to make up too. Their first semester, they didn't do well against Hockey East opponents, 3-6-2 in Hockey East. And then when they reached the final stretch in the second half, they just were unbeatable. They only had 3 losses in the second half. They're 13-3 since the start of the second semester. So they have been rolling, and in part due to a top line that has maybe been the hottest line in Hockey East on the women's side, and that is Kirchmeier, Knapp, and Johnson. And Riken Kirchmeier is our Service Credit Union scoring leader. She finished off the regular season with 37 points, 30 of those in league play, so against Hockey East opponents, which is the best in both of those categories in the conference. And then you look at what her and Knapp have been able to do. They both finished with 19 goals this season. That is the top of Hockey East as well, and they climbed their way up in the second half. And the total points output from that line, they've been able to put up 56 points through the last 16 games of the season from January 1st into the end of the regular season. That is just so much of an offensive output that it was able to propel them to this new average, this much better scoring average. They're now averaging 3.1 goals per game in the last 16 games. For the second semester, they were averaging 2.1 before that in the previous 16 games. So they've been able to bump themselves up a whole goal per game, and they're getting great goaltending from Hope Walensky as well. So they're able to host. It didn't look like a possibility earlier in the season, but they went on this run, and now they will be hosting Northeastern, who's fallen to the 5th spot.
Yeah, and they beat Northeastern twice the second half of the season as part of this 13-3 stretch. So they do have some positive momentum out of that. And I think the thing that stood out is it was their scoring in those games, right? They beat Northeastern 5-1. They beat Northeastern 3-2 back in January. So we'll see if that carries over. It's kind of crazy to see Northeastern here, right? Just 3-5 in their last 8 games. This is the lowest they've finished in Hockey East in 14 years. But I think before we even dive into it, what do we know, right? We did this with Beanpot, right? Northeastern knows how to win these big games. We've seen them do it time and time again. So even though they're on the road this time, they still have that experience winning these tournament type games, as they've done in Beanpot, as they've done in Hockey East consistently the last couple of years. I think the big question with this Huskies team, though, is who gets the start in goal. Lisa Janssen, who has been so good, but was pulled last Friday in the game against Vermont. They brought in Maddie Robitzer. She came in, made 10 saves in the game on Friday without allowing a goal. Then one on Saturday with 18 saves, just 1 power play goal allowed. So it'll be interesting to see where Dave Flint goes. Janssen's obviously been the one who's carried most of the load this year. Robitzer did start against Providence. Her only other appearance of the season was earlier this year, back on January 17th. She allowed 4. So I'm kind of interested to see where they go there, but they do have that big game experience. They know how to handle this environment. It's not going to be new for them, so it will be interesting to see how they fare in what should be a really, really interesting game to send somebody to the semifinals.
Yeah, and Providence is the only team that Northeastern hasn't beat in Hockey East yet this year. So that's something to take note of as well. Providence won all 3 of the regular season games, and Northeastern looking for a little bit of revenge probably in that, so that they don't get swept for the season. And we'll look at our other game as well. Our number 3 seed Boston College and our number 6 seed Maine, also on Saturday at 4:30. And Eric, Maine was able to avoid the opening round. That was the main point that they wanted to get across in the last final stretch. Just get out of that opening round. You get the bye, and they were able to do that with a pretty strong finish.
Yeah, pretty impressive here. Maine, since January 24th, They played 9 games. Most of the other teams played 10. But since January 24th, Maine went 5-2-2. They did not lose a game in regulation. Both of those losses were in overtime. So a 9-game streak of getting at least a standings point. They've gotten more standings points per game in that stretch since January 24th than anyone else in Hockey East. You can see UConn and Providence slightly better records, but Maine has been right there. So it's pretty impressive. That includes them going unbeaten in their final 5 regular season games, especially to get out of that opening round, as you talked about. And they do notably have a big win over Northeastern in that time. You could go back even farther. They're 8-4-3 since December 14th.
Yeah, and they were able to get the job done that they wanted to, avoid that opening round, and they match up with Boston College, who actually hasn't finished off the season super strong, 3-4-1 over their last 8 games, but really they did win the games that mattered in that stretch, and including against Northeastern. They took 4 of 6 points 2 weekends ago, including a Sunday win at Matthews 3-2, and that was important because they were all kind of grappling for those spots 3, 4, and 5 in the standings, and which made the difference for home ice for Boston College being able to take those points.
2 more quarterfinal games to tell you about. We'll talk about those on the other side when we come back on This Week in Hockey East.
Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. Well, Eric, we had 2 games on Wednesday that determined who was going to move on to the quarterfinals, the opening round matchups, and we're going to get into that right now. First of all, we have UConn knows their opponent now. They're going to play Merrimack. Merrimack got a win against UNH on Wednesday night. They ended up with a 3-1 win. They scored the first 3 goals of the game, were able to hold on. And part of that was because of their goaltending that they got. And Margot Favre we're going to give her our Jersey Mike's a sub above Women's Player of the Week because she was able to make 33 saves. The only goal she gave up was with 33 seconds left in the game, so she almost made it all the way through. And this was a kind of a revenge win for Merrimack over UNH for a previous game that they had not so long ago, where Merrimack was behind by a lot, came back, almost won, lost in overtime. But this one is the important one, so they set themselves up to play in the quarterfinals against UConn, and that's a matchup that UConn has taken all 3 wins, but 2 of those were back in November. One of them was more recently at the end of January, so that's probably more what they're going to go off of film-wise and see. But for Merrimack, they've actually now never lost an opening round game. They're 4-0 in the opening round, and they all were as the lower-seeded team. So the big challenge with them now going on to play the number 1 seed is that UConn is coming in with a lot of momentum. They had to sweep BU in order to get first place and get that number 1 seed. And they did. They got all 6 points last weekend, kind of riding a high and getting contributions from different places in the lineup as well. They got a lot of veteran contributions on Saturday, 2 goals for Ava Rinker, an empty net goal for Jada Habish. Those are 2 players that wear an A and are veterans. And then they also have this young 4th line that's been scoring and been contributing. And so you combine that with good goaltending from them as well. Tia Chan, we'll get to some of the awards later on, but once again finds herself as the goalie of the year in Hockey East. And so that's all the backdrop for this matchup that we have on Saturday.
Everything in this league is close, and that's what certainly stands out in a major way. Let's talk about the other one. Vermont gets an overtime victory over Holy Cross. 3-2 is the final score. Cece Delorier scores the game-winning goal in overtime. Vermont trailed 1-0 early in that game, just 48 seconds in. Charlotte Sontag scored for Holy Cross, but I thought it was impressive not only that Vermont came back, but remember, this was a Vermont team that lost 2 games to Holy Cross just a couple of weeks ago on the road. They were swept. So to bounce back was really impressive. And then I think it's interesting, how does BU bounce back here, right? They had a chance to win, as you said, the hockey's regular season. They didn't. UConn had a great weekend. They win all 6 points. That doesn't take anything away from BU's season. They still had an amazing year. So now they have an opportunity to try to bounce back from that and hopefully try and, do it again. These are teams that, again, everybody plays 3 times, so we do get a lot of tape on what these matchups might potentially look like. BU and Vermont split the regular season in January. Then BU won the third game just a couple of weeks ago, a 4-1 final score. But even that game was tied with, kind of midway through the second. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I really want to see what the special teams matchup is in this particular matchup. You look at BU, they scored 3 power play goals in 3 games against Vermont, including 2 in a game. Vermont even scored a shorthanded goal of their own. BU scored a shorthanded goal across the series. So how does the special teams play out? And related to that, you're going to talk about it a little bit later, but Tamara Giaquinto, who was named the Hockey East Army ROTC Defender of the Year, she has been especially good on the power play. So she's our night shift all-academic standout to watch. 6 power play goals, 16 of her 17 points have come in Hockey East play. So does she have a major impact in terms of where the special teams are in this particular game? That'll be something to watch for this matchup. So both these games are in the afternoon. UConn will be at 4 o'clock on Nesson as they take on Merrimack tomorrow. Coming up, we'll look at our men's slate of games this week, including our Friday night Hockey East game to watch between Boston College and New Hampshire. That's all coming up on This Week in Hockey East. Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. It's time to go around Hockey East, presented by Boston Harbor Hotel. Let's look at our Friday night Hockey East game on Nesson at 7 o'clock coming up after us. Boston College, number 1 in the country. Once again this week, number 1 in the pairwise, number 1 in Hockey East. They take on New Hampshire. BC right now has a 5-point lead over Maine for first place in the Hockey East standings. They did play an extra game last week. Maine will play their extra game next week, so they don't have the same number of games right now. But basically, the way to look at this is if Maine were to drop 1 point somewhere this week against Vermont, then BC could potentially clinch as early as Saturday at New Hampshire, the number 1 seed in Hockey East, if they were to get all 6 points this weekend. It would have to be all 6, and Maine dropping 1. If Maine were to win their game in hand, basically you're looking at a 2-point lead for Boston College right now is where we're at in terms of the standings. BC with these 2 games against New Hampshire and then just 1 next week against Merrimack on Saturday, whereas Maine has 2 home games against Vermont this week and then 2 road games at UMass. So I'm really interested to see how that sorts itself out. The guy for BC, though, that really stood out last week as BC has kind of bounced back here from a couple of losses in a row in games that I'm not sure how poorly BC played, but I thought they had opponents play really, really well against them in BU and UMass. Andre Gasso was excellent last weekend against Vermont. Co-Hockey's Player of the Week. He had a 6-point weekend, 3 goals and 3 assists. He now has goals in 3 straight games. He has points in 5 straight. The Eagles are going to need someone. Without Jalvik here, they've been out with him for a little while. It's going to be important for some of these top 6 guys to even take another jump. And Gasso has certainly been that guy recently. And you talk about bouncing back, right? Boston College, 14 goals in these 3 games since the back-to-back losses. So it does feel like they have bounced back. And by the way, Ryan Leonard now has a national lead of 4 goals in the national goal-scoring lead. But this was a close game last time these 2 teams played at the beginning of the month, Bridget, up at the Whittemore Center.
Yeah, and it was in front of a sold-out crowd up in New Hampshire. Good vibe from the beginning of that game. And it was a game that UNH was actually leading. Early in the third period, it was 2-1. They ended up with goals from Cy Leclerc and Ryan Conmee, who made it that 2-1 score. But then BC finished out really strong. Third period performance. They put up the next 3 goals. It was all scoring from all different areas of this BC roster as well. It was some guys you don't see score a lot. Gabe Perreault, obviously, yes, scoring all the time. But then you had Will Vogt, Gentry Schamberger, and Mike Posma as the other goal scorers. And they end up bringing this to a 4-2 win for Boston College in that first matchup of the season. And when you look at UNH and where their special teams are at, and the record hasn't been great over the last stretch, but the actual special teams numbers and some of the underlying numbers are still good. You look at the power play, they have 12 power play goals in this 13-game stretch, 25% on the power play for them. Penalty kill, they've killed off 12 of the last 13 penalties over the course of the last 6 games. And then they don't allow a lot of shots either. So 26.5 shots per game in those 13 games allowed. And if you look at the advanced analytics, top 10 in the country in terms of creating high danger chances as well, which I know, Eric, is a stat that you love. I got to get to those
I
advanced
mean,
stats,
it is crazy because it's just like you said that like the record has not been there, right? 1-11-1 in their last 13 games, but so you don't expect to see that, but they are creating. So it feels like there's a world where I'll put it this way: whoever's the 6th seed, I don't think that's going to be an easy game against the 11th seed if that's what it ends up being in New Hampshire in a couple of weeks. Be really interesting to see what happens. BC and New Hampshire Friday, Saturday. Home and home. Plenty more will continue around Hockey East on the other side.
Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. I'm Bridget Prue alongside Eric Galanti. It's time to continue to go around Hockey East on the men's side, presented by Boston Children's Hospital, the official children's hospital of Hockey East. Eric, we've been talking about this over the course of the last few weeks. The logjam that is the middle of the Hockey East men's standings. Who's separating, or are we just continuing to see this really close cluster of teams fighting for those middle spots?
Yeah, I think what's fascinating is we don't really know what these teams who are, we think in, but could be on the pairwise bubble, how potentially having to play an extra game in the Hockey East tournament or not could affect things positively or negatively for the bubble, right? We don't really know, what makes it sort of interesting. I think the obvious series that jumps out is UMass and UMass Lowell. That's a Thursday, Saturday. Those are the two teams on the bubble right now. It's a shrinking bubble in terms of the national picture. So that's obviously very important. Who comes out of that finishing as the 6th highest Hockey East team versus the 7th. But I kind of want to look at Merrimack Providence for a second. Merrimack keeps hanging around this cluster that we're talking about. They've won 3 of their last 4 now. We've seen them beat BU. We've seen them beat UMass in January. They beat BC, obviously, in early January. They swept UConn back in November, which that could be huge for potential tiebreaker scenarios, right? Who knows? So they enter this weekend just 2 points back of Providence in Hockey East. I'm really interested to see what this Warriors team does with Providence. We've talked a lot about Providence. I feel like, we've seen some high highs. We've seen some times where they've struggled to get their scoring touch. They've obviously been down Connolly a little bit at times. So I'm kind of really interested to see what Merrimack can do right in that cluster of things in Hockey East this weekend.
Yeah, and they're not separated by many points in the standings with Providence College, who they'll have a head-to-head with, a home-and-home series. There's 2 points separating those two teams as we enter the weekend. And it's for PC, they're coming off a win over UMass Lowell, 4-2. Philip Svedback had another good game. One of those goals he gave up was on a penalty shot, so that's always makes things a little bit more difficult. And they were without Trevor Connolly again in that game against UMass Lowell. He skated in warmups, didn't end up playing in the game. He struggled with injuries throughout the season. So still to be determined whether or not he will be in the lineup for Merrimack. And he's somebody that's very key on the power play for them.
We'll take some short shifts on the other side when we come back.
Welcome back inside This Week in Hockey East. It's time to take some short shifts presented by the Shift Group, helping former athletes and veterans become elite business professionals. And of course, Eric, let's talk about the goalies.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to put into historic context just how well Jacob Fowler and Albin Boya have played this year, right? Theoretically, you're going to be picking between those two for the Hockey East Goalie of the Year. You look at their numbers side by side, and it's pretty close, right? Fowler, slightly better save percentage. Boya, slightly better goals against average. Jacob Fowler has a few more shutouts. The thing that really stands out to me, though, so Fowler, 937 save percentage, a 173 goals against. Boya, 931 save percentage, a 164 goals against. There have only been 5 times in the last 20 years that a Hockey East goalie has finished a season with a sub 175 goals against average. It's only happened 5 times. Devin Levi in 2022, Philip Lindbergh on his way to leading UMass to a national championship in 2021, and in 2019 he did it as well. Both of those he didn't, obviously he was splitting time with Matt Murray, so it's not as many games, but nevertheless impressive. Then you go all the way back to Hellebuck in 2013 and Parker Milner in 2012. There's a chance we could have 2 guys do it this year. It's only happened 5 times in the last 20 years, a sub 175 goals against average by a Hockey East goalie. And as of right now, it's tracking to happen twice. So just to show the remarkable years that Jacob Fowler and Albin Boya have had.
And what I'm looking at for my short shift this week is we just got the announcement of the all-rookie team and a few really major awards in Hockey East on the women's side now that the regular season is over. And some of the things that stuck out to me was there are so many good rookies in this conference. When you look at who makes this team, this is a team that could beat other teams made up of your veterans and players that have been here a little bit longer. Lisa Janssen in net for Northeastern is the goalie on this all-rookie team, and Northeastern has a few selections here too. But Kendall, one of the defenders, Eloise Curran, forward, and then another unanimous selection to this team was Claire Murdoch, who's had a great first year with UConn and maybe could be instrumental to their playoff run as they start to try to defend their title from last year. You mentioned Gia Quinto, the defender of the year. She's one of those shutdown, but also offensive-minded defensemen. She's got a lot to her game. And then best defensive forward is a player that is kind of unsung because this is a player in Hannah Johnson that's on a line with Audrey Knapp and Riken Kirchmeier, who are putting up all these numbers, and she's just in the background assisting and winning faceoffs and playing really good defense to help that Providence team go on a really strong run in the second half. And then the sportsmanship award goes to Ray Sott. She's somebody who does a lot of community service. She plays for Merrimack. And the runner-up was Carrie Clorty of Boston College, another person who's involved with the community. And then to look at the ones that are based off of your actual stats, the Hockey East scoring champion is Riken Kirchmeier for her 30 points this season. Sammy Tabor and Audrey Knapp were right behind her with 28 points, but Riken having another really good season. And then Tia Chan, based on the numbers, goals against average, best in Hockey East, save percentage, best in Hockey East. And so she is the Hockey East goalie of the year.
It is the best time of year. It's award season, but more importantly, it is playoff season. Bunch of great games on Saturday. Coming up next here on Nesson is our Friday Night Hockey East game of the week between Boston College and New Hampshire. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of This Week in Hockey East.